Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Supply Chain Management Consortium's first in a series of webinars on our supply chain readiness assessment tool. In this webinar, we're focusing on creating strategic advantage in aerospace. And we're doing this, of course, to align to your business and drive supply chain bottom line impacts. The assessment that we're talking about takes about 30 minutes to complete. Hopefully some of you have been able to find time to complete it, and we thank you for that. Others, it's free, it's online. Feel free to complete that assessment at any time. We appreciate you taking your time out for today's webinar and on building a resilient enterprise. And of course, we hope that your family are healthy and safe. Again, this is the first of a series of webinars on supply chain management readiness assessment. This webinar is on aerospace. The next webinar at the end of August is in retail. Then we'll have subsequent webinars in electronics, government, and automotive. We look forward to this being an interactive webinar. Please do answer the polling questions if you would, using the poll EV that's in the chat. And then also in the chat, you can answer the questions there also. My name is Jim DeVries, a president and founder of Enhance International Group, working with Greg closely over the last few years. I will be the host of today's webinar. We also have Connor Fincham from Uphaven Group, and out of South Africa, he will be supporting the webinar. Again, Greg Schlegel is with us here, and he'll share his vast expertise. Greg is one of the original founders of Supply Chain Risk and Resiliency and former president of Apex ASCM. Greg founded the Consortium in 2010 and is a celebrated speaker and esteemed author of the book, Supply Chain Risk Management, an Emerging Discipline, published in 2015. And now it has emerged, I think, Greg. And with that, an introduction.
You bet. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for the kind words. I am the founder of the Supply Chain Risk Management Consortium, as Jim mentioned. I'll give you a thumbnail sketch of the consortium in a minute, but we've been in business for 13 years. We operate in about 23 countries. I've taught supply chain risk management for 10 years at Lehigh University here in the States in Pennsylvania. I still teach ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, at another U.S. university, Villanova, in Pennsylvania as well. Spent 8 years with IBM as a supply chain practice lead. Perhaps like many of you, I spent 30 years as a supply chain exec for a couple of Fortune 100s, including a stint as a DoD plant manager. All right. And as Jim mentioned, I've been an Apex member, now ASCM, for 45 years, ultimately resulting in being the president of that organization back in the late 90s. I'm sorry, Jim, you're gonna give them a profile.
I'll give them a quick introduction of myself. My name is Jim DeVries, as mentioned before, from an Enhanced International Group. Actually, my first jobs out of college were in aerospace, but recently I built this Enhanced International Group over the last 5+ years. We have over 50 consultants, consulting companies, and SaaS providers. And all our SaaS providers and consultants and educators are vetted as best in class. EIG, we serve as that master integrator to provide you the access to the best and brightest companies, and we act like a Swiss Army knife. With that, I think, Greg, a little overview of the consortium.
Yep. Yeah, we thought we'd give you a thumbnail sketch. On the right-hand side is who we are, and on the left is what we do. We got 32 companies. That's about 1,700 supply chain risk professionals around the globe. These companies bring tools, techniques, solutions to help us do one thing: identify, assess, mitigate, and manage supply chain risks. So you can take a look at the companies on the left-hand side are basically what we provide. We kind of bring the products and services into 5 areas. We have Online education for about the last 5 years. We have 2 certificate courses, self-paced. You get in, get a year to finish, you get a certificate. One is basic supply chain risk and resiliency. The other is geared around public health care. We do a lot of coaching and consulting. We lead, guide, direct, and coach companies on their journey. We have a host of enterprise software as a solution type platforms that you can see on the right-hand side to do the heavy lifting in supply chain risk. And then we're very proud of 2 online assessments. The supply chain management online readiness assessment is what we're going to talk about today, and we'll get into doing a deep dive in a moment. The newest is a prescriptive online supply chain risk and resiliency, pure risk. And it comes out with a 90-day action plan. It's a set of online survey questions, and it gives you a sense of your risk maturity in a model, in a 5-stage model, what your risk appetite is, and what your risk culture and operating culture is. So we use a lot of AI ML algorithms in that arena. We're very excited about those 2 online readiness, online assessments, and we're going to talk about the supply chain management assessment tool today. So with that, back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And just following up on Enhanced International Group, we provide collective, collaborative, experienced thought leadership to enable your organization to deliver positive margin growth, the competitive advantage, focusing on 90-day action plans. And reviewing our bicycle slide, the IG team has modeled the company's ecosystem with 2 wheels, the right wheel being the strategy wheel, the larger of the 2, and the smaller of the 2 being the sprocket is your execution. And one positive rotation of the strategy wheel will result in many execution cycles. And that's how a good operating company would want to be. And so we always are looking at ways to drive that strategy and execution and linking it through tactics to gain execution strength. And quoting Albert Einstein, life is like a bicycle. To keep your balance, you need to keep moving. So we'll keep moving and just review briefly the upcoming webinars. Again, next webinar will be August 31st in retail at the end of the summer. And then we'll move on to electronics, government, NGO, and automotive. If there's another industry that you would like to be covered, please let us know and we will adjust accordingly. With that, we want to get into our deliverables today. We want to describe how process maturity enhances your bottom line financial performance. Again, we're talking about this assessment and understanding your maturity. If you can drive it to the bottom line, which we strongly believe it does, by assessing and maintaining and managing your maturity as you grow, you will enhance your bottom line performance. We'll also get into leveraging your strengths so you can improve your weaknesses and how the assessment provides you insights for that. And then understand where you are relative to your competition. This is in our 3rd tier. And then provide some case studies and look at some best practices in the aerospace industry. With that, Greg?
You bet. Thanks. Our agenda kind of looks like this, folks. We'll start with some compelling reasons to act from our point of view. Then we'll get into the supply chain management assessment methodology. We'll do that. Then we'll get into overall radar scope. We call it the radar scope for aerospace, and talk about supply chain management process maturity in that arena. Then we'll do a deep dive into the aerospace supply chain management landscape for you, our point of view. We have 2 case studies in aerospace utilizing the tool. We'll share those with you. And then we'll finish with leveraging your strengths and improving your weaknesses utilizing the tool. So we'll have some final thoughts. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Thanks, Greg. And we're kicking off on the compelling reasons to act. So why look at supply chain risk or supply chain management? And so we want to kick it off with a survey question on what are your challenges. We can see that we already have a few listed in here. Component delays, shortages. You might have a warfighter readiness metric that you're trying to meet if you're in the Air Force, and a supplier financial health is another one. So we welcome you to enter in the chat. You can enter it in there, and then we'll enter it in the assessment if you can't get access to poll EV. Greg, any thoughts, comments on these challenges?
No, well, thanks for engaging with us. There's enough, there are enough challenges out there to keep us all busy. So we appreciate your engagement with us, and we have several other questions and then comments and insights. So hopefully we can talk to a few of these challenges during this session.
Yeah, so at the end of this particular section, we'll revisit this slide, or revisit the survey. So please do keep entering them in as we go through the next couple slides of what we've found out in literature as far as challenges. So this is a pretty interesting chart that kind of lays it out for us, and that is McKinsey performed this about last year in late 22. And they looked at the expected losses from supply chain disruptions, and they equal about 42% of 1 year's EBITDA on average over a course of a decade. So that's just lost money. So every time you're doing your planning, financial planning, and you say how much you can make, you have to, these industries, especially the top, need to take into account these risk events, because they're going to affect their bottom line across the board. So again, the first column is the industry, and aerospace is at the top on the commercial side. Net present value is in the second column, and you can see aerospace is at about 67% of annual EBITDA. And then the net present value for the company is in millions of dollars. So here we got $1.56 billion of impact to aerospace in the commercial industry, and a net present value of expected losses to the margin of 7.4 points. And as you look down there, you can look through all the industries on the impact on the bottom line of these risk events. So it certainly impacts all the industries across the board. Greg, any comments on this?
It's rather ominous. It's great to be number one, but in this case, it's a bit disturbing. That's a lot of money, and we have a slide in a minute or two to explain a little bit in terms of why aerospace, from a McKinsey point of view, is number one from an EBIT shock point of view. So yeah, it's great to be number one, but perhaps not necessarily in that profile. So,
and we thank Barbara for her comment on customer health financial situation emergers, also a big area. Greg,
oh, okay, yeah, from a sector point of view,
yeah,
someone had, yeah, okay, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
But all right, well, we wanted to give you a picture from McKinsey of where industry sectors reside from their point of view and their calculations in terms of EBITDA impact to supply chain demand and supply shocks. This is a further discussion from McKinsey in the same report. They did a nice job profiling each value chain's exposure to demand and supply shocks based on that industry's geographic footprint and factors of production. So we highlighted aerospace, and you can take a look at the top left. The legend is really the light blue, you're less exposed, to the actual black, which is more exposed to shocks, demand and supply, then we'll go across the horizontal line with aerospace. So if you look at aerospace, the first column is the overall shock exposure, and the aerospace sector is at 8. So they're kind of in the middle, maybe even a little lower on the low end overall. But as you go through the elements that they use to rank and calculate overall exposure, take a look at the pandemic. They're number 2, and number 1 is most exposed to higher numbers. So they're number 2 at the very high scale, if you will, of the pandemic, because of the pandemic, and that's talent, that is workload, that is facility. And so they're number 2 from a pandemic impact point of view. Number 1, large scale cyber attack. The bad guys like to target aerospace, whether it's commercial and or military. Geophysical events, they're a little less exposed than others. The heat stress, which is climatology, again, a little better than most. From a flooding point of view, meaning where are aerospace facilities, again, not as bad in terms of exposure. And then trade disruption, they are, what do we have there? Number 5. So yeah, it goes back into a lower number because of the nature of the footprint of the aerospace supply chain. So we wanted to share with you where aerospace, from a McKinsey calculation point of view, resides within their shocks to their value chain. So we wanted to share that with you.
Thanks.
We have another, we have another insight. This, we thought we'd share this from, these are comments from Wayne Monteith, Brigadier General, retired U.S. Air Force. This comes out of a recent aerospace and defense conference down in Florida. His opening comments were, you could take a look. Current events are resulting in significant increases to supply chain risks. Okay, we agree. This brings increased importance to understanding and managing the DoD supply chain. We have no argument with that opening statement. All right. What he further said is the DoD industrial base, we call it DIBS, affectionately known as DIBS, has experienced what? From his point of view, from the U.S. Air Force, demand shortage, setbacks with suppliers, long lead times, bankruptcy, workmanship issues, work shortages, obsolescence, and the list goes on. So there's enough reason to be concerned about the supply chain in DoD. And finally, he more or less made a closing comment. We need to take an introspective look at risks impacting the current supply chain environment. That's the defense industrial base, and the cutting edge techniques that maybe can be applied to do what? Mitigate these risks and drive supply chain performance. So this is what we constantly advocate. It's not only good to improve your supply chain performance, but you also have to begin to mitigate those risks. So kind of a twofer, music to our ears. We wanted to share that with you from that A&D conference, and I'll turn it back to Jim.
Yeah, and we loved your comments. Please keep them coming. And, please let us know what are your challenges you're encountering. And we'd love to talk more about these as you come. Supplier financial health, just a few seconds on that. We've seen quite a bit of a ratcheting down on companies that have been overextended, and those suppliers are going out of business, and therefore a loss of supply. So we're starting to see more of that in the first half of this year. We expect to see more of that in the following year. Greg, next section.
Yeah, you bet. I thought we'd give you a quick review of the assessment methodology. So we'll give you an overview, then we'll do a little deep dive as well to give you some context. So Hope you enjoy our radar scope. All right. We thought it was appropriate. So this is an overview of our online supply chain management readiness assessment. All right. On the left-hand side, we have multiple tiers. On the left-hand side, we think of it as internal use within your own four walls, and maybe even individually, but tier 1 out of 4 tiers, think of it as a timestamp. All right, we use the picture of a clock. When you go through tier 1, if you haven't enjoyed the assessment yet, when you're done with tier 1, what do you get? It gives you a sense of your as is position. Where are you in terms of supply chain process maturity? From our 40 years of experience in the game, it identifies surprises, and we'll show you what we mean. It gives you a profile of the tenant maturity today, not tomorrow, not what you'd like to be, but who you are today from a supply chain process maturity. And really what we try to do is drive conversation. Once you go through it, all right, it tends to drive conversation in terms of, well, what does that mean? How can we improve that, and so forth. So tier 1 is as is, where you are, who you are. Tier 2, you can consider a group approach. Might take a division or a plant with multiple disciplines and departments collectively giving a consensus. All right. And when you go through tier 2, what do you get? It basically says, again, who you are. You get your as is. Then it gives you an aligned vision because it's a team consensus answer. It identifies strengths and weaknesses. We call it strategic, tactical, and operational, which means we take the 13 tenets, which we'll show you in a minute, and we highlight your strengths and weaknesses. And then finally, again, it's when you're done with tier 2, you get an aligned team consensus of that division or that plant or that product line. Very, very compelling. And then we have 2 other tiers. Tier 3, which you might consider, and this is a bit of internal and external analysis. Tier 3, basically you go through, it develops a roadmap, and at the end of the questions of discovery from tier 3, you get a profile of your industry position. Also, it asks you about what do you think tenets are important to you, and it ranks them. Then how satisfied are you with those 13 tenets, and it ranks them. And after you rank those questions, you basically get a tenet prioritization in terms of what might we improve and or leverage first, second, or third. So it seeds an action plan. This is what we've seen. And then tier 4 is essentially a playbook. We call it a playbook because once you get to tier 3 and move into tier 4, it's kind of a playbook that says, if you're going to do anything, do the right things, do them the right way, in the right order. If you're in commercial aerospace, we talk about OTIF, on time and in full. That's basically saying, help improve customer satisfaction. And if you're in DoD and military, it's how to improve the warfighter readiness metric. So pretty compelling, different threads and outcomes from the different tiers, and we'll do a deeper dive in a minute or two. So I'll turn it back to Jim.
And we welcome questions anytime throughout the webinar. And we have a survey questions just around that assessment. Have you performed any kind of supply chain assessment in the past couple of years? And so Greg, anything that what you're seeing? I mean, we're certainly seeing a lot of folks registering today, taking the assessment. What have you been hearing out on the street, so to speak?
Well, the one thing is we call it, folks, the big shift, the big supply chain shift. All right, it's happening. Meaning, for 40 years, All of us have gone offshore, look for the lowest labor cost, and that was our supply chain approach. Get the lowest labor cost, and that's a good thing. We've spent 40 years doing that, and now because of all the risk elements, we've found out that China is not maybe the best partner in the world from a geopolitical point of view, from a quality point of view. So there is what we call the supply chain big shift. People are starting to take a look at their supply chain, who they are, how mature they are, and what kind of supply chain should I have if I want to be more resilient as opposed to more efficient. So that's what we're seeing and hearing out there with our clients, with our workshop attendees, and also with our webinar attendees. So I just wanted to give you a little context there.
So yeah, and I've been seeing the same thing with my clients, is that their supply chains are changing, the SKU mix is changing, and of course the supply base is changing because we're no longer outsourcing to the same locations. A lot of insourcing in the US, and then a lot of countries are trying to do more insourcing, while other countries are trying to open up, like India. So it'll be a very interesting time over the next few years as things continue to change, and where we thought we'd source for the next 10 years, it may be much different than we think. With that, we'll keep moving.
Good. All right. Yep. We said we'd give you a deeper dive. So we thought we'd start with the genesis of the assessment tool. Where did it come from? So it was kind of born out, like beer. It was born out of a first of a kind MBA course in supply chain risk management at Lehigh University, which I built out. I was requested to do that as I was teaching supply chain to undergraduate classes. So it was so well received that we actually took it on the road. Tool's been operating inside the consortium in many different fashions and levels of sophistication for over 10 years. We've utilized it in our classrooms, in our workshops around the globe, in webinars like this, and with client engagements. We've now upgraded the tool. It's now sitting within a learning management system, normally called an LMS. And it basically measures two things. It measures your supply chain process maturity and your inherent risk. And I'll go through real quick on the left to give you a thumbnail sketch of what you're seeing on the chart. All right. So we spent 30 years in supply chain, both Jim and I, and many others in the consortium, 12 years in the risk game. And we put together this assessment to essentially do two things: assess your as-is process maturity as we see it, and your inherent risk. So there are 13 tenets. You can see them. Those tenets, in our point of view, make up a good end-to-end supply chain profile. The star chart's a maturity chart. It depicts the maturity of your company's supply chain process, where the lower the number, closer to the center of the graph, the more mature that particular process is. And you can see with 13 tenets, we color-coded them. The blue are strategic, which we consider strategic. The red on the right-hand side are tactical. And then the green, army green, if you will, are operational. So you go through the questions. The farther away you are from the center, the less mature that supply chain process is. All right. And then inside of the chart, and the as-is answers are in the black line. All right. So that's the company's as-is position at the moment, the black line. You can see three other circles: green, orange, and red. Those are inherent risk circles, if you will, spheres of influence. So again, the farther you are away from the center of the graph, the less mature your process is, and we consider more inherent risks. So the whole assessment tool tier 1 is a twofer. That's a technical question. It evaluates your process maturity and also gives you inherent risk within that process. So with that, we'll move on. Excuse me. We have some testimonials for you. Jim, you could just tee them up. I want to focus on aerospace. You can see we cover a host of industry sectors. Almost every industry sector has gone through our assessment. We have over 3,000 folks who have gone through this assessment tool in 10 to 12 years. Recently, though, we wanted to focus on folks in aerospace, and we just wanted to articulate what a defense executive said. Your assessment tool was the most complete supply chain management assessment method I've seen to date, and this gentleman was in the business of aerospace and defense for 40 years. So we appreciated the kind words. It was a very good reinforcement that the questions in the assessment tool are pertinent to aerospace, and we think to almost every industry sector. So with that, we'll move on to a little bit more of a deeper dive on tier 1. Remember, tier 1 as is. In this particular, I'll say, use case, this company is what we call a mainstream. All right. You can see in the top area, we have 4 categories. We'll categorize a company as a leader, mainstream, apprentice, or ring of fire. In this particular case, this company came out with 5.7. We have all kinds of algorithms that evaluate. You can see the gauge up on the top left. This company comes in as a mainstream company, and you can see, again, the chart in terms of their maturity and their inherent risk. So what do you get? The output, you can assess your mature and immature processes. We talked about that. You should investigate the immature processes and reinforce the mature processes, leverage those strengths. What's the practical call to action in our point of view? Address the surprises. All right. What's the value prop? Develop an action plan to address the immature processes and get your stakeholders aligned. Move the needle forward. What does good look like from our point of view? Improvements being made and notable increase in maturity over time. And I'll give you a point of context. We just got a request from a past user in another industry sector who went through the tier 1 about 9 months ago, took some action, practical call to action, modified some of their very immature processes, and now they want to go in and use the tool again to show improvement to their executive team in terms of improving those particular immature processes and reducing their risk. So very, very encouraging to us that a user would want to come back and use the tool again as an objective third-party evaluation and benchmark their progress. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
And we're back to a survey question. How do you feel about performing supply chain maturity in your company? Do you feel it's very important, extremely important, somewhat important? Enter it into the chat. I think it's very often in companies, it's tough to sell up. We sometimes see things relative to other perspectives in the organization. And I've found that maturity levels and assessments have greatly helped move the company in a positive direction. Greg, your thoughts?
We're passionate folks. If it's not intuitively obvious, we're passionate that supply chain maturity is absolutely important for 2 things. All right, for sustainability and risk mitigation. All right, so we always talk about the twofer. You can do them both. You can improve your supply chain maturity and performance, and you can do some good things in terms of mitigating risks to reinforce the drive for what? Resiliency. We're all trying to build resilient supply chain. So again, we appreciate you getting engaged with us with the polling questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. And again, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them in the chat. We love questions. And with that, we'll build on the tool, that's online tool that we launched last August, where we have over 200 active users. And this is being leveraged by the consortium's licensees and partners around the world. And we have over 100 completed year to date, or from August to date. With 2 more months, we'll hit our 1-year anniversary of the online tool. It's working out quite well. We're gaining quite a bit of traction across many different industries, and as Greg said, many industries. And to name a few, of course, the government, NGOs is one of our predominant users. The retail industry, CPG, and second, and third is aerospace, as far as filling out the survey. And then we have electronics, 3PL, and automotive and oil and gas also completing it. There are many other sectors where we have multiple responses, but those are the ones that we're receiving the most feedback on. And then we have our bank of previously completed assessments that we refer to for our in-depth analysis. With that, just want to go through the assessment overall. Again, the tier 1 through 3, you're getting in tier 1, you're looking at the outcomes of the tenets where you're at. Tier 2, you're looking at it, the group consensus across strategic, tactical, and operational perspectives. In tier 3, we're looking at where are you positioned in your industry, the importance and satisfaction, so you can prioritize which tenets to work on for your company. So out of that, you're going to come up with objectives like the one that Greg just mentioned, where they were able to, just from the tier 1, come up with a couple of objectives. As you mature, we feel that the STO in the tier 3 will become more and more important as you turn these into action items. And then our tier 4 is the playbook, which assembles everything, and working with you and your team and 32 hours of consulting, we put together a playbook for you on how to improve your supply chain network and operations of your company. With that, we want to get into the radar scope. Just a quick description of this radar scope and how we laid it out. We have the rings, very aligned to the spider diagram that Greg shared with us earlier, where the best-in-class folks are the leaders. They're in the center of the diagram, and then you move out with the followers, and then average, and then the laggards in those rings. And then we overlaid strategic, tactical, and operational. So in this case, this company is predominantly strategically focused, with a tendency to operational a bit, and then tactical lastly. So we'll look to see how that works. So we'll go through 4 case studies. First case study is the company number 1, who's between now strategic and tactical, and in that average to follower level. Company 2 is in the follower level, approaching leaders, and they are more operationally focused and a little bit towards the tactical and second as far as their propensity. The third company here is a little bit more on the laggard side. They're on the tactical side and moving in on towards operational second. And then company 4, this is a leader company, and they're between strategic and tactical in their propensity. So if you'd seen our other webinars last year, you might have seen how we aligned where you are from a benchmark perspective. Leaders, of course, being your highest scoring or lowest scoring companies, but the best scoring companies, and those would be the leaders. And as you move out to the highest, so we do this by industry sector, so you can assess where you are relative to your industry. With that, we're going to take a deep dive into the landscape of the aerospace industry, and we want to identify what risks you're experiencing in your supply chain. So we have a few populated here: weather, geopolitical, component delays, customer delivery penalties. That's, of course, when you can't deliver when the customer wants you to deliver. Those are very painful. And then supplier solvency. So these affect all industries, but when you're building planes and aero force things, there's going to be all sorts of penalties involved if you're not able to deliver on time, because you affect everybody else. It's a very complex supply chain. So that's one that is predominant here. We welcome you to enter in your additional ideas. Greg, your additional thoughts?
Nope, there are more, but you know, not every risk is the same. Just remember that, folks. When you start to assess the risks, it's the old 80-20 rule, and there are many more risks, and the risks tend to be strategic, tactical, and operational. So you know, not all risks are the same, and that's why we advocate utilizing a quantitative and a qualitative methodology to evaluate the risks, because again, we have a lot of risks, and I think we have an outcome from the Secretary of Defense in a minute or so. We have enough risks out there to keep us busy, but really the point we want to get across is not all risks are the same. So just be aware of that and appreciate your engagement. Yep. Speaking of, these also surfaced at the recent Aerospace and Defense Conference in Florida. And what we did is we wanted to give some props to Mike Collar, who was speaking at the conference. He was a supply quality assurance engineer from Ball Aerospace, and he more or less shared this with us in terms of what the Secretary of Defense was talking about at the conference in terms of just 12 risk categories out of 124 sub-risks from the Department of Defense point of view. So you can take a look at it. I mean, again, there are a lot of risks out there for the defense industry, industrial base. These are just 12 major categories, and the key is not all risks are the same. You can take a look at them. Wanted to share that with you. Again, there's enough risk out there in the defense industrial base to keep us all busy. We have a few more comments from the conference. These are thoughts from Kenitra Tyler, Supply Chain Risk Management Service Element Lead at NASA. This also came out of the A&D conference a couple of months ago. They established, I'll just go down real quick. NASA established what they call the Proactive Supplier Engagement Process, affectionately known as PSEP. To do what? To cultivate a synergistic relationship with their suppliers. Information Communications Technology, a group they have, and the Supply Chain Risk Management Group conduct comprehensive assessments of every company's supply chain. Why? So they can better understand provenance, pedigree, and position of their supply base. So the PSEP provides a framework for them associated with their suppliers so they can mitigate any risks from a supply point of view that could impact their mission and their ecosystem. Very encouraging. Suppliers submit their entire product line and portfolio to NASA. They are compelled to do that and to be considered in their what they call CAP, Coveted Articles Portfolio. So what is going on? What has the outcome been with NASA? At the moment, NASA's project they project they've experienced about 90% reduction in case-by-case reactive individual supply chain incidents. And one other tidbit, just to blow our own horn a little bit, we've been with NASA, they've been a client, they've adopted our 5-stage supply chain risk and resiliency maturity model within this group and others. So very encouraging to us. And with that, I'll turn it back to Jim.
Great. And we're back to the survey, and we had a few more entries. So thank you for entering those in. Keep those coming. We have some minerals, Greg.
Well, yeah, there's, I mean, I'm surprised there's not what we call REEs, rare earth elements. That could be what someone thinks of as minerals.
Yeah, I think so.
Conflict minerals, we know all about that. You know, buying gold and tinium and elements like that from the bad guys. But trust me, we have enough risks out there in our defense industrial base to keep us all busy. So thanks again for engaging in our conversation here. All right, with that, we said we would share with you 2 caselets utilizing the tool within the aerospace arena. So let's take a look. First and foremost, we have an aerospace leader. By our definition, we consider this company an exemplar performer. You can see the gauge on the right. The gauge comes out of the automatically out of the tool, identifies the company as an exemplar with a calculated element. Remember, I told you the closer you are to the center, the more mature your supply chain processes are, and the less inherent risk you have. So if you take a look at this particular company, you can see they're operating inside what we call the exemplar level, level 3. All right. So very encouraging. We have more on this client. So we could go to the next slide and take a look. This is more or less a picture of tier 2, folks. We told you we have 4 tiers. We went left to right, talked about them. The previous slide gives you the as is. When you go further in the assessment tool to tier 2, you get a industry segmentation. And in this particular company on the top right, we consider them a leader in the industry class. And then you can take a look at their strategic, tactical, and operational focus. What you see here is the lowest number is the strongest tenet area. So with this company, they're very strong in the tactical execution. All right. But take a look at the numbers between strategic, tactical, and operational. They're fairly close together, very tightly aligned. And what we do is we try to give you a Venn diagram, blue, green, and red, in terms of the strategic, tactical, and operation. And when you look at the Venn diagrams, you can consider the larger the Venn diagram, the area of the circle, the more opportunities there are in that area to improve your supply chain. So we gave you tier 1, then this is what you get from a tier 2, and you can take a look at this leader's profile of strategic, tactical, and operation. So that's one case study we wanted to share with you. The second case study is an aerospace company that we consider an apprentice. All right, a little bit of a different complexion, different company. You can see the gauge, you can see the calculated number. This company comes under the definition of an apprentice. You can see the graph. Essentially, the as is profile is a little different. they're operating a bit farther away from the center. They have a few outliers, so you can see where they're somewhat mature and where they have a few outliers within their supply chain. So it's not as mature as the first caselet, and they have obviously some additional inherent risk within those processes. So we can take a look at tier 2, same company. From a top right point of view, industry segmentation, again, they come up as apprentices with the calculated number. And then you can see their strategic, tactical, and operational focus. In this company, their strength is in operations. And again, operational, tactical, and strategic are color coded, and you can see they're rather similar. They're tightly aligned as well. So this company, even though it's less mature, it seems they are attempting to handle many of the tenets in supply chain simultaneously, because they're very tightly aligned between strategic, tactical, and operational strength. So from our point of view, there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of improving their supply chain performance and process maturity and mitigating risk. So we wanted to share 2 different perspectives with you in terms of aerospace companies going through tier 1 and tier 2. With that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
So we have one last survey question, I believe. And maybe you could share with us in the chat, what benefits could you gain by going through the assessment? Greg, maybe you could share what folks are typically gaining from going through the assessment.
Well, sure. From a commercial side, folks, what we see is when organizations begin to improve 1, 2, or 3 of the tenets, it essentially goes to the bottom line. All right, in terms of either increased revenue, reduced cost, asset turnover, cash conversion cycle, and freeing up capital, especially freeing up cash, especially in a downturn that we're all experiencing right now. So in the commercial side, it's really bottom line. On the military side, we see aerospace organizations focusing on one metric, and that is warfighter readiness. That's what DoD wants to improve every day. On time, in full, that's fine, but warfighter readiness is the driver for the defense industrial base in terms of a metric. So just wanted to give you some context there.
Thanks, Greg. With that, we'll keep moving to the last section here where we get into the bottom line impacts. Greg started talking about some of the metrics. We grouped them into 4 categories: revenue growth and margin growth. And that is, these benchmarks come through with Gartner and IBF. The second area is EBITDA, earnings before taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And that particular metric is aligns very close to cost to serve, capital management improvements, and increased net pricing. And then our third is return on net assets, which involves less inventory, higher inventory turns and with your peers, relative to your peers, fewer stockouts. And that was brought to us through Gartner, and that's where these benchmarks come from. And then CCC, cash conversion cycle, that's your free cash from all your investments to the time that you get paid. So that involves return on capital and, of course, on time and in full, because that's linked to your payments. And you can see this is we put together this chart as a summary of what we've seen in companies that increase maturity. They're seeing, by moving from laggards to average, or average to followers, or followers to leaders, you're seeing that up to 3 to 6 points increase in improvements, markedly increases in on time and in full, and and from less inventory up to 15% less inventory from these type of activities. So in today's tight market where you may have excess inventory, you're trying to clean out warehouses, you have too many older materials, those RONA is a very good metric for you. So we really provided this to help you explain to your management if they are not clear on the impact and maturity all the way through to the bottom line. Greg, any additional thoughts?
Yeah, we think they're pretty, these are pretty compelling, folks. Whether you're in commercial and or the defense industry baseline, these are pretty compelling bottom line improvements. So again, we've done a lot of analysis with dissertations, with PhDs, with studies in terms of trying to find a very strong statistical correlation between supply chain improvement and financial health and strength. And it's pretty compelling. We don't have time to share those benchmark studies with you, but we've seen them, and there is a real strong correlation, and especially in a downturn that we're experiencing right now. So pretty compelling statistics in terms of driving improvement in your supply chain processes. All right, we thought we'd finish up with a review of our deliverables. You know, with the tool, utilizing the assessment tool, you can see how process maturity enhances your bottom line finance, especially from a performance point of view. You can leverage your strengths and improve your weaknesses. You can understand where you are positioned relative to your competition from a best-in-class point of view. We did provide you with some real-life aerospace case studies. We have many, many more. And we provided, tried to give you some aerospace industry best practices. So with that, I'll turn it back to Jim to close out.
So many thanks to each and every one of you for joining us today and your feedback. We really appreciate it. And we, if you have any questions, further questions, feel free to reach out to Greg and I, and we'll get back to you. And Connor, thanks for your support and setting up the webinar. And most importantly, again, thank you all for participating in this webinar to make it engaging. And we hope that you've gained some insights that you can take back to the workplace. Greg, your closing thoughts?
You bet. We appreciate your engagement. We hope we provided some insights regarding how improving your supply chain process maturity can lead to strategic advantage, especially in this arena, because very competitive and very dynamic arena at the moment. So again, thanks for attending, and all the best in your journey.
And just a few closing thoughts. My thoughts, as we know, we're in this time of where we think everybody's worried about an upcoming recession, and over the next 12 months, we've been in a bull market since October. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace, a lot of strife. We'll continue to see that. Understanding where you're at from a maturity perspective and where you're going is critical to understanding how you're going to survive and thrive in the years to come. So we appreciate your time for joining the webinar and look forward to seeing you in future webinars.